got some trees out here that I want to see if I can get down. See, one of the beautiful things about snow in winter is it's easier for me to get out to these wet areas, believe it or not, with the snow versus just straight mud. So it's a little bit breezy. I got to be a little careful, but I want to knock that one right down. It's pretty much obvious what's going to happen with that. I'm going to see if maybe I can sneak back in there with a tractor so I can pull the butt. But if not, I'm just going to set the camera up and take it down chunk at a time. So what do we have in the bucket? We got that little John cutter, and I've got a 70E, which is probably the saw we're going to use. Then I've got the 80, and if I can run the 80, I think I will. I just put a new bar and chain on it, and that's going to really change the game with that, because the bar and chain I had before was kind of sketchy at best, you know. So what's the first characteristic of a good chainsaw? The very, very first one, and that would be, does it start? Because if it doesn't start, I don't care how hot and cool it is, it's not any good to me. So, let me start with this thing. I haven't run this in actually quite some time. I did fire it up, I don't know, a week or so ago maybe, for about 5-10 minutes. But maybe I'll find something for it to do today. Yep, these cases failed. This is like an early 2000s era 372 original edition. And I guess this is one of those graphic things. This came out of a logger's camp. And a point I want to make here is, it's actually not unusual for me to see this, is instead of having the bearing pockets fail like you see in the later ones, bearing pockets now are fine. It just rattled itself to death in every other screw hole that the thing had. I bet when we pull it apart we'll probably find the case screws themselves are rattled a little bit loose. The bearing pockets will be fine. So I'm harvesting parts off it because I can't do anything with the cases. And this was that one that had Chicon cases at one time. And I bought a new set of cases to convert it all over to OEM. This is at 365, 48mm original edition top end. I'm not going to go through the review, but I like those saws because they're a little bit lighter. They have a little bit less rotational mass, so they feel lighter when you're running them. And I like these older flywheels on that build, not necessarily the hot rod newer ones, because they have less fins and they're also a little bit lighter. So the whole package just feels a little bit snappier. Do I want to go milling with it? Probably not. For doing the general saw work around the farm, that combination of literally lighter weight but also lighter feeling saw, a little bit easier to pull over because it's a little bit smaller in displacement. It's 48mm versus 50 or 51.4 with big saws. I just think it's a nice package. I've been doing these for a while. And while some people go for ultimate power at a saw, for me it's about living with a saw, coming up with a concept where it has the right kind of power for the work you do, but the day-to-day life of the saw is easy to be with and fun to be with, and that's what I do. So anyway, I'm going to start harvesting bits and pieces off this saw. There's a good crank in there somewhere. I'm not going to do that all in video, but I'm going to break this all down and get the bits and pieces I can, and then use its chain brake and some of the other bits and pieces for my 48mm build. Notice the nylon thread locker on those screws that hold the oil pump. You want to keep them with the oil pump. I put a little bit of 1184 back on them when I bring the saw back up to, or when I put that oil pump in. That one looks pretty good actually. Yeah, maybe. I'm going to probably toss this one. That's alright, I'll use that one. You can tell that's original edition because on the X-Torqs one of these is truncated because it won't fit in with the transfer caps. Perfectly good oil tube. One out of there. Yeah, it's a little soft. Probably toss it. Alright, I've got to dump the oil out of here before I split these cases apart, otherwise I'm going to have a whole bunch of oil all over me. And the interesting thing is, this saw here has probably more time on it than any of the later X-Torqs that you see me pull apart on the channel. By far. Absolutely by orders of magnitude. Yet that bearing is still tight, and I wouldn't be surprised if the bearing itself is still tight. Okay. This, my friends, is the difference between the original edition cases and the X-Torq. Those bearings are, that bearing is fine. It is nice and smooth. Even though the rest of the saw has come apart. That's a steel cage bearing. And you can look at it for yourself. It is all intact and it works just fine. For that matter, what I'm going to do, just to add insult to injury, is I'm going to pull that freaking bearing out of there. I'm going to stick it in another saw and let it run another service life, just to make a point. Anyone who argues with me, because I do get arguments, on whether or not that steel cage bearing concept matters. Let's pull the other one out. So that's PTO side, and this is a saw that had the rest of the cases rattle apart for a variety of different reasons, just like old age. Yet that steel cage bearing is still in there, still solid. Oh, I got a nice crank. Yeah, nice and tight. Made it all worthwhile for me. So these are the bearings that came out of that set of cases. Nothing wrong with them. Still tight, still smooth. Got a little crud in there from, let me just clean them up a little bit. Well, I think in this video I'm going to do something a little different. Is always focus on things like the cylinder and the muffler mods and stuff like that, but very few people focus on just the assembly of the PTO side. And in this one here I'm going to focus on the bits and pieces on the PTO side, bar oil pump side, all those things. And maybe I'll get into the chain brake. But start off with, you got this little tiny O-ring that goes in first. The first thing that goes down in there. And some people will argue that it's not necessary. I happen to think it is. And what it does is it seals from on the inside diameter of the sleeve, this is what goes up against the bearing, to the bearing on the inside. There's a chamfer on the inside of that that captures that little rubber seal. Now this surface right here is what rides underneath the seal, PTO side seal. I don't like putting anything in there dry. So I got the little O-ring in there, right? Now I'm going to put that bushing, push that down inside. Okay. That goes right there. Okay. You see how that sits at the edge of that sleeve and won't let the worm gear work its way back into the seal. Next on the stack is oil pump. Now, I find it easier to put the oil pump in with the little brass tube that goes up to the
case. It sits in like that. It's easier for me to put all that stuff together like this and then push the oil pump right in there. Now, what I prefer to do is on these screws, is I put a little bit of 1184 on them, because that's another leak point in the saw if it's not done properly, because the holes for those screws go all the way through into the crankcase. So I put just a little bit of 1184 on them, just to help them seal. It just simply isn't. So using the power tool on this is probably not the best idea. Is I'll tighten these by hand, by feel. Don't go crazy, just go firm. Remember, this side here has to crush down on that little pickup tube. So you'll feel it go down there, and then just go solid, just go firm. Don't go any tighter than that, just firm. Now, at this point in time, I need to put that little rubber on. There are a couple of places that need grease. One is in here. One is right here. And one is on the worm gear itself. I'll stick it in there. The worm gear can go right down in there, just like that. So at this point in time, you can go right to putting in the chain brake assembly. And where you start with that is, there's a little piece of plastic in there, and that goes in first. This one right here. Second, this one here looks pretty good, actually. Gotta get some grease on that. Blow this one off. Because what you got to do now is I got to put that spring in there, and then once I get the spring on there, I've got to pretty quickly get that plastic cover slapped on there to hold things in place. So now I've modified a tool to do this to make it a little bit easier for me. I took a brake spring tool and basically ground that down so that I could squeeze the spring in there, yet be able to turn it right back out. And everyone has their own technique. This is just what I do. And I'm not arrogant enough to think that this is the only way of doing things, you know. Many ways to skin a cat. It's just what I do. And basically what I do is I just get it to where it hooks as best I can. Like that. get it out of there. And just push it in with my finger if I can. Tap it into something. And once it's in, get that cover on there. Make sure you've got grease on the detent, that. You gotta make sure there's grease in those things and get this darn cover on there darn quick. Just get it on. And just get nice and firm. Now, I would suggest at this point in time, for someone like me, get that thing on there. Just get it on, so you don't forget. And you can. It's pretty tight. All right, I've got to get that little rubber piece there before I forget it. All right, so here's that little piece. It sets on the end of this little brass tube, like that. Goes down into that recess right there. My saw. It's not a customer saw. That's held in by this little tiny screw. You got to remember, on these new cases like that, those threads have not been tapped. So the screws are effectively self-tapping screws at this point. So it takes a little more effort. Okay. That's on there. Worm gear's on there. That's all tight. This might be an X-Torq handle. Yeah, that's an X-Torq. Let me see if I can find the original edition style handle. Most of the X-Torq's got that little hip right there. It's a little bit taller too because the whole saw is bigger. And also when you undo that, you got to kind of make sure that that ring gets down underneath those. There's like little detents before you try to put your clutch and stuff on there. So anyway, let me just finish off the clutch real fast. Got the worm gear. At this point in time, the end of that collar is right there, and that's what the clutch will run up against. So it's a good time to put the clutch on, and I'll rattle it on with an impact driver. Just enough so when I try to start it, it won't come flying off of there. You gotta remember the reverse thread. I'll just stick it. Don't want to go crazy with that, because what'll happen if you go nuts with that, it'll take out your pull start. So, and also you don't want to go crazy on air hammer on your crankshaft anyway, because they're really just press fit. You'll find yourself with a crank that's been twisted. So you don't want to go crazy. Just enough. I gotta put a little bit of grease on the bearing surface. Just me. Okay, now on the clutches, you've got that slot right there, which captures the worm gear. You're clicking back and forth. That means it's captured properly. Now I'm going to get myself a sprocket. And since this is a 48mm, it's not going to pull an 8-tooth. I'll put a 7-tooth sprocket on this and have it do RPMs versus torque. Best brand out there for this is Oregon. So Oregon 7-tooth, 3/8, and then one of those washers right there, and then this little clip right here. We're really close to being able to do a test fire to see if this saw both runs and pumps. I think the only thing I need is a couple of handles, right? So let me go find a handle and then get some gas in this thing, and we'll see if it'll fire up. As I pointed out before, there's a difference. There is a difference between the X-Torq and the original edition chain brake handles. The X-Torq is actually quite a bit taller to accommodate the taller saw. Well, I've got one of these. Now, gotta have a top hat. That top hat that goes like that, and this goes on like so. And somewhere around here, I think that's it. I've got myself up. And then on this side, there's a little screw that goes right here, and it's got a little tiny thread on there, so you got to be kind of careful with this one. Don't want to run it in too hard. Therefore, you have a handle. Now, I'm going to put the handle bar on. This is one I had hacked up from a full wrapper. I don't like full wraps. Some guys do, I don't. So I cut this one out. Let's set it on there just so we can pull start the saw. Alright, I think we have a video. We have a saw. There we go. Let's see if it fires back up. Alright, it'll get squeaking tuned tomorrow. That's enough for a video, I think.